Hello, this is Joaquin Lippincott, CEO of Toad, and I'm here again today with another ISV AWS interview. And today I am joined by Rob Tucker, founder of Meta. Rob, welcome to you.
Hey, thanks, Joaquin. Great to be here.
Well, it's good to see you. Rob, you and I have worked together, but for people who aren't familiar with your company, tell us about Meta.
Okay, so Meta came out of some consulting work that I was doing. So I spent a lot of time consulting in film studios and broadcasters across the supply chain. So things like supply chain rights, scheduling, asset management systems, all that kind of stuff. Um, and something that's really become obvious is that over the last decade or so, the asset side of the business, video components, etc., has had a huge amount of investment. Um, but the data side of things is all over the place and still is all over the place. So there's lots of custom built legacy systems, complex integrations, transformations,
Hmm.
that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so I was on a project for 12 months at Warner International, and it's almost as extreme as it gets, really. They've got 200 channels, 80 languages, delivered to 3,500 VOD partners and platforms and things. So it was kind of really extreme end of the spectrum, and it was all being served through these kind of custom legacy applications. So I worked with James Crossland there to come up with the original project or application specification, and that's really how kind of Meta started. It initially was just a kind of quite straightforward title catalog management and enrichment platform with a real focus on user experience. And with their quite extreme international requirements, it was really the best place to start. And as a kind of API first application, what started to happen was they would have other systems in their supply chain that were like quite horrible to use, slow, like poor user experience. And so we started to get asked if we could integrate into those systems and bring that data into our system and then present it through this kind of lovely user interface. So we've kind of shifted from being this title catalog management application to being more of a kind of supply chain front end.
That's great. Yeah, we have called it the spaghetti monster or the spaghetti ball. Nobody really knows what. I wouldn't even say it's just spaghetti. You've got some ravioli in there for sure, and some tortellinis, all kinds of things.
Yeah, everybody's got a different kind of flavor.
So tell me, as it relates to AWS and the cloud space, was that part of the architecture from day one, or did you come to it later? How did you get involved in the cloud?
Yeah, so we were with AWS from the very beginning, and so I think how it started was we actually applied to be on their Activate scheme, which is this scheme they have for startups. And what that gives you is it gives you some kind of credits to get started, but fundamentally it gives you access to all of their kind of principal solutions architects, and that has just been incredibly valuable for us. So you're trying to build these quite complicated SaaS web applications, and you're able to really quickly get access to the kind of leading people in the field to kind of help you and guide you through it. So we've had phenomenal support from Amazon from the beginning and still to this day. And we have engaged with other, don't want to be dismissive, but we've engaged with other cloud vendors as well. And we don't get anywhere near the same level of kind of support or even knowledge in the space. So we're huge fans of AWS.
That's fantastic. And so within the ecosystem, obviously with a company called Meta, you're dealing with metadata. What are the other places that you plug into within the M&E space?
So in terms of that ecosystem or the kind of media and entertainment supply chain, you've got the kind of standard stuff, it's slightly different per company, but you've got your kind of rights and your catalog,
Mhm.
systems, MAMs, localization, scheduling, delivery, all kind of knitted together with some kind of integration layer or service bus or something. And it's really hard, and we see this all the time, it's really hard to actually, within a business and within a supply chain, know where to go to get certain bits of data, or where the source of truth is for a kind of given attribute. And if you want to report on something from across those systems, it's pretty much impossible. So what we do is we start at the very beginning of the supply chain. So we are the kind of the title catalog lives with us. So actually, that's not quite true. Normally, there's a rights management system, and a title will begin its life in there. We've got the rights for X title, or we've created X title, and that will have a tiny piece of metadata associated with it, like a release year and a title or an episode number or something. It then flows into us, and then we become the source of truth for the everything downstream. So in the first instance, what we do is we would connect into some of the kind of standard enrichment services, or matching services like IDA, IMDb, Common Sense Media, Gracenote, all of that kind of stuff, and we can start to aggregate that as per the kind of company's requirements. So we really kind of start a little bit outside of the ecosystem or the supply chain. And then we start, so we kind of sit on top of it. So once a title gets created in us, we then go into other systems and start performing the necessary tasks. So we will go into an asset management system, and we'll make all the placeholders and folder hierarchies that they need for the content. Same thing with image management, and we're setting all the IDs so we can kind of keep the supply chain reconciled. So we're integrating into all of these different systems. So in the first instance, we can keep the supply chain consistent. But what we then do is we kind of pull key data in from those systems that the customer wants to see, and the kind of force multiplying effect of that is that now through our application, you can then report on anything from any system. So you've got all the rights data and all your kind of assets and that kind of thing. So you can run reports like, show me everything that is scheduled to go on this platform on this date in this country that doesn't have these subs or dubs, or is missing this kind of synopsis or anything. So it gives you this incredible kind of visibility over the whole ecosystem.
That's great. I'm curious, when you talk about IDA or IMDb or Gracenote, is there a category for that type of product? I mean, I know what they do, but what do you call it?
That is so interesting, and it's almost like I fed you that so you could tee that up for me, which I didn't do. But it's absolute truth, right? We've been looking at this today, so it's a thing, right? So there's all these different types of enrichment sources. So you've got the kind of ones like IMDb and Gracenote and TiVo, and they've got these kind of comprehensive data sets. And then you've got these more niche ones like Common Sense Media or IDA or whatever it is. And it's a bit of it's not a mess, but it's just very vague. There's no real kind of definition around it. So a couple of weeks ago, we actually had this conversation. We were saying, what would be really good would be a white paper about the landscape and who are these sources and what do they cost and what kind of data do they have and what kind of technical delivery mechanisms do they have. And so we're actually working on that. So the answer is, yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we're kind of hopefully going to put out a paper over the next week or so that really starts to put some kind of structure and explains that whole area.
Well, it's so funny. I'm working on a white paper right now that's going bigger in terms of the ecosystem, but you coined it, enrichment sources. I'm going to create a little space in the ecosystem for the enrichment sources. So if it sticks, it sticks. We'll see. So talk about a little bit of the cloud technologies other than yours that you've read about or you've heard about or you find especially interesting.
So I try and kind of stay abreast of what's going on, but we really get into the detail with customers and the types of systems that they're deploying, and some of the stuff that looks really interesting at the moment is the integration layers have always been really complicated. You'd have all these kind of cloud-based systems, but then how they were integrated was through potentially some kind of old legacy integration layers or service buses and that kind of thing. And so we're working with MGM, and they're using a company called Workato, and they do this. I think it's like APaaS, like Integration Platform as a Service, or whatever that new sector is. But they got this really lovely kind of approach. It's a cloud-based application. They've got these kind of recipes that you put together, which is quite a cool way of approaching this new integration space. So that's one that's really interesting. There's another in that specific space, which is Reshuffle. And it's kind of the same thing, but more for developers. So developers can build integrations through Reshuffle like in incredibly kind of short time frames. So that's kind of integrations and just how a couple of companies are really taking out a lot of the complexity there around integration layers. And then I think more broadly, as supply chain kind of metadata in general improves and matures, which it is, and we see that everywhere. I think that there's going to be a huge shift in personalization. of content. And I think, you need to do the basics stuff well. You've got to have your editorial and technical metadata good, which people are kind of getting to. But then, there's companies now like Canvas who do emotional and audience kind of sentiment response, which is fascinating. And then getting into things like kind of personality profiles and character traits and habitual data. I think that is where stuff is going to get really, really, really interesting. And, hopefully get to that North Star of having a kind of UI less entertainment experience. And with that kind of thing, and it's actually going back quite a few years now, but I always think about the UI in that movie Her by Spike Jonze,
Right.
where really, that whole thing is, completely data driven from the application side, but also from kind of the user side. And you just get the user interface out of the way. Less is more, and you just kind of deliver the content. So I think things are definitely moving in that direction. And then I think Sean might have mentioned this as well, but I recently started looking at some of the stuff that Melinda Ozil was doing around facial expressions, and why I think that is so interesting.
Like sentiment analysis?
Well, no, no. So you've got Canvas who are doing like audience sentiment, by scraping basically what people are saying about stuff and what do people feel about it, and presenting that through an API, which is super cool in itself. But what Melinda does is more about the extraction from video content. So it's kind of like, being able to scan in a movie and pick a scene and actually going into the faces and pulling out the emotions of the characters in the scene. And so this kind of builds up an emotional profile of a piece of content. And I think that's going to be, when you start to pair that, the type of profile of the character of the content with the profiles of the characters of the people that are watching it, then I think that your personalizations are going to become, orders of magnitude better than they are today. So that's kind of like one area. And then a company that always, for the last 3 or 4 years, have been continuing to do super cool stuff is Wirewax. It's a company in the UK. They started out as an agency, but now they've got these really crazy, so they do this like shoppable video stuff. So they had to build these tools to kind of identify heat maps in videos and things, so you can say that's a Fendi bag and go and buy it. But what they've done is they shifted that technology to do kind of extraction of videos, and they're just always coming up with these really super cool tools that then about 18 months later you start seeing being deployed in some of the kind of bigger vendors. So they're really always kind of leading the curve in that kind of space. So that's a few different businesses that I think are pretty cool at the moment.
That's interesting. Well, so we were just talking about this before we actually started the camera, but coronavirus, right? You're in London. I know you guys are on lockdown. What do you think the impact of the coronavirus is going to be on the media and entertainment industry over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Obviously, it's a quite difficult crystal ball kind of a question. To put it in a bit of context, so from our perspective, in terms of the impact initially, obviously it was a kind of, what do they call it, white swan, black swan event, or whatever it is. And our customers that got channels and platforms and things that are kind of ad revenue driven felt a lot of pain. Obviously, we've got customers in the airline industry as well, so you can imagine that's a tough place to be. And that's going to trickle down on us, and it has made things more challenging. Obviously there's this huge shift to working from home, which initially seemed to be quite manageable. But I think companies across the board are starting to really feel the lack of community and the absence of kind of this spontaneity that comes up when you're working with people. And for us, like building new features and continually innovating a product is like a fun, collaborative process. We got whiteboards and animated discussions and all that kind of thing. And we really struggled early on with the distance between the team members. And a few times I'd be on a call with the product team, and we'd really be struggling to talk through something that was like an absolute breeze before. And it would get to the point where I'd just say, like, forget it. I'm coming to your house now, and then we'd just sit down and scribble it out, and you'd smash it out in half an hour or so. But it just got to that point. And then something else that we kind of noticed is that obviously, when you're like us and you're a vendor in this space and you're trying to connect with people and get their time essentially, so you can kind of show them what you do, it's been very difficult historically. But now, weirdly, it's been kind of much easier because people aren't traveling around and they're not going to different offices for meetings and things. And so that whole portion of people's calendars has been removed. It's been replaced with these kind of boring
Yeah.
Zoom sessions now. Not these, but everybody's calendars are
Yeah,
just filled
all
with
the other
these.
Zoom sessions, not this one.
No. But this is much more interesting than the normal kind of 10 people looking through a spreadsheet. But yes, it's easier to kind of get people's time, which has been a positive outcome. But I think it's really started to reach its limits. We've started to, within the rules and regulations, try and start getting people back together as much as possible for kind of key things. So that's more of an answer about our perspective, and I'll leave the crystal balling to someone else.
Yeah, what's interesting about what you described in terms of that connection, I think that the existing connections, the pre-existing connections, we're sort of feeding on the connections that we've made in the past. Like you and I, we've spoken to each other, we've worked together in the past, and I think that for customers too, they're not going to conferences, and so when they can't go to conferences, they can't really get something that's going to stick and be stimulating. I think the relationships they've had with people in the past really become even more important. It'd be really tough to break into the industry right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing, right? And I was thinking the other day that, we would frequently be in our customers' offices, that you really embedded, working with the teams and things. And I just realized, like, we haven't made any new friends in the last,
Right.
since it all started, right? You don't realize that, but you'll be in a meeting and this, oh, who's this new guy? Oh, this is so and so, and then you have a little chat. You don't get that anymore at all. And then weirdly, we were on a call. We had this call scheduled a couple of days ago, and somebody wasn't able to make it, but we didn't find out until 15 minutes in. So we just had a chat for 15 minutes, and it was the most office-like kind of experience that we've had in a long time. That we're just here. Why don't we have a chat? Because you would normally do that when you're waiting outside a meeting room or something. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I've started actually going back to college friends and looking to see which of the people I knew from college are living in town. It's just,
Yeah.
hey, let's reconnect. Okay, so going bigger, get out your bigger crystal ball. That was the little one. This is this is the 35 millimeter, 45 millimeter, whatever.
Yeah.
What do you think the impact of cloud is going to be on business over the next 3 years?
Well, so I can remember the pre-cloud supply chains. So I've seen that shift from how it used to be to these kind of cloud-based, data-driven supply chains. So I can see the impact up until now has been phenomenal. And I think as that matures and we kind of move forwards, we're seeing customers now on their kind of second generation cloud-based value chains. And I think it's less of a cloud thing, but more of an industry thing, is that all these systems are getting easier to plug together. The longer they've been in the cloud, the more mature they've become, they're kind of easier to plug together. So there's kind of standards and frameworks emerging that let these supply chains be kind of put together in really short timeframes. And I think that's going to kind of continue. And as an example, which is a bit left field, but we've been working on this kind of like slightly guerrilla project with a customer that was essentially around putting together a quick delivery pipeline in AWS. So it's kind of like taking some metadata, some images, video, multi-language subtitles and things, sucking that in, ingesting it, validating it, transcoding it to Dash and HLS with all the kind of ABR bitrate ladders and things, and then pushing that into a customer's API. And we've been able to get a working version of this in basically a week. And that is something that would, a few years back, even the notion of that would have been ridiculous, and now it's it's something. So I think moving
Yeah.
forwards, it's just going to kind of continue, and I think it will make. Obviously, you've got the technology in the cloud, but obviously you need the right people in place to be able to kind of leverage it and make the most of it. But I think it's just going to continue to make companies more agile from a technical perspective, be able to kind of adapt to market shifts more quickly, and then do a lot more of these things like pop-up channels and these kind of really quick platform launches. So I think it's just going to be able to make businesses a lot more agile.
Indeed. Well, Rob, thank you so much for the time. I want to ask one last question. If people need to get in touch with Meta or they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
So that is go to the website, which is www.meta.how. And that's the idea behind that was actually, people would go there to find out how Meta can help them. But now all that happened is that people just think the company's called Meta.how, which was the unintended effect. But that's the way to access us is to go to the website and all the contact details are on
Well, Rob, from Meta, not meta.how, thank you so much
there.
for your time.
No problem. Thanks, Keen.